The invitation that never came. My name is Scarlett Hayes, and the day everything changed did not begin with shouting or chaos. It began with something far worse. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you question everything you thought was real. The kind that wraps around your chest and refuses to let you breathe properly. That morning felt normal. Almost too normal. Like the calm before something you cannot yet see coming. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through my phone, not expecting anything, just another ordinary day, until one post stopped me completely. It was a picture. Soft white roses arranged perfectly, golden chairs lined in rows, and a caption that read, "Final wedding preparations, we can't wait for the big day." My fingers froze, my heart skipped, and for a moment I just stared, confused, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the name, and everything inside me shifted. It was my cousin, the same cousin who used to call me her sister, the same person I had stood beside through her worst moments, the same one who promised me that when her wedding day came, I would be right there next to her, smiling, celebrating, family, and yet here I was, finding out about it like a stranger on social media. No message, no call, no invitation, nothing, just a quiet, cold realization that I had been cut off. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the invitation got lost. Maybe she was planning to tell me in person. I kept creating excuses because the truth felt too sharp to accept. But the more I scrolled, the worse it became. More photos, more comments, people I knew talking about travel plans, outfits, excitement. Everyone included. Everyone except me. And that was when the truth stopped whispering and started speaking clearly. This was not a mistake. This was a decision. They did not forget me. They removed me. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling something heavy settle in my chest, a mix of rejection, confusion, and something deeper. Something that felt like betrayal. How do people who claim to love you suddenly act like you do not exist? How do they plan something so big, something so meaningful, and make sure you are nowhere near it? That question stayed in my mind, repeating itself, louder each time, and in that moment, I realized this was not just about a wedding. This was about being pushed out, about being treated like I did not matter, about being cut off without explanation, and the pain of that realization was not loud. It was quiet and sharp, like something breaking slowly inside you. I put my phone down and looked around my house. Everything felt the same, but I did not. Something had shifted, something had cracked, and I knew I could not ignore it. I could not pretend everything was fine anymore, because it was not, and deep down, I started to understand something important. When people show you who you are to them, you have to believe it. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That was the moment the story truly began, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that forces you to see the truth you have been avoiding. I was not just excluded from a wedding. I was excluded from their lives. And that realization changed everything. I did not know yet what I would do. I did not know how far things would go, but one thing became clear. If they could cut me off so easily, then maybe it was time I learned how to cut off everything that no longer respected me. And if you have ever felt this kind of betrayal, this kind of quiet rejection that hits deeper than words, then you already understand that this is not just a story. It is something real. Something many people go through but rarely talk about. So make sure you stay with me on this journey, because what happened next changed everything in ways no one expected. And before we continue, if you want more powerful stories about family, betrayal, wedding drama, and real-life moments that turn into life-changing decisions, hit the subscribe button now, because this story is only getting started. The truth they tried to hide, the silence from that morning did not fade. It followed me, it sat with me, it forced me to face something I had been avoiding, because deep down I knew this was not just wedding drama. This was something deeper, something intentional, and I needed answers, real answers, not the soft excuses I had been telling myself to avoid the pain. So I picked up my phone again, and did the one thing I had been hesitating to do. I called her, my cousin, the same person who had once promised me that no matter what happened in life, we would always stand by each other. The phone rang longer than usual, and with every second, my chest tightened, until finally, she answered. Her voice sounded normal, too normal, like nothing was wrong. Like I was not sitting there feeling completely cut off from something that clearly mattered. I did not waste time pretending. I asked her directly. I said I saw the wedding post and wanted to know why I had not heard anything from her. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to tell me everything I needed to know, and then she spoke, but her words were careful, almost rehearsed. She said things had been complicated. She said it was a small ceremony. She said she did not want stress, and with every word, I felt the truth becoming clearer. She was not explaining, she was avoiding, and that was when I understood. This was not about space or simplicity. This was about exclusion, about making a choice and then hiding it. Behind soft language, I asked her one more question, simple and direct. Did you choose not to invite me? And this time, the silence was heavier, because there was no way to hide from that question. When she finally spoke, her answer was not loud, but it was enough. She said it just felt better this way, and in that moment, something inside me settled, not in peace, but in clarity, because that was the truth they tried to hide. It was not a mistake, it was not an accident, it was a decision. I had been deliberately cut off, and hearing it confirmed changed everything. The conversation ended shortly after that. There was nothing more to say, no apology, no real explanation, just a quiet ending that felt colder than any argument could have been. I sat there for a long time after the call, thinking about everything, replaying memories, trying to understand when things had changed, when I had gone from being important to being excluded, and slowly, the pieces started to come together. Small moments I had ignored before suddenly made sense, the missed calls, the delayed replies, the way conversations had become shorter, less personal. It had been happening for a while. I just did not want to see it, because sometimes the truth is not hidden from you. You just choose not to look at it, but now I had no choice, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. This was not just about one person, it was about a pattern, about people who had slowly started treating me like I did not matter, people who were comfortable taking from me, my time, my support, my loyalty, but were not willing to stand with me when it mattered, and that realization hurt, but it also opened my eyes, because when you are constantly giving and receiving less in return, you start to lose yourself without even noticing, and maybe this moment, as painful as it was showing me something I needed to see. I stood up and walked to the mirror, looking at myself, really looking, and I asked myself a question I had never asked before. Why am I holding on to people who have already let me go? That question stayed with me, because it forced me to face something difficult. The problem was not just that they cut me off, it was that I had been allowing it in small ways for a long time, and now it had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored, and that was when the shift began, not loud, not dramatic, but real. I was no longer confused. I was no longer making excuses. I was starting to see things clearly, and clarity, even when it hurts, is powerful, because it gives you the ability to make decisions, and for the first time, I started thinking not about why they did what they did, but about what I was going to do next, because being rejected, being excluded, being treated like you do not matter, it can break you, or it can wake you up, and in that moment, I knew I was waking up. This was not just family betrayal, this was a turning point, and even though I did not yet know exactly what my next move would be, I knew one thing for sure. I was done chasing people who were comfortable cutting me off, because if they could remove me from something as important as a wedding without even a real conversation, then maybe it was time I started removing myself from everything that no longer respected me, and that thought, as quiet as it was, carried a kind of strength I had not felt before, because sometimes the truth does not destroy you, it prepares you. And what I was about to do next, they never saw coming. The breaking point after the truth settled in, everything around me started to look different, not because the world had changed, but because I had. Once you see clearly, you cannot go back to pretending, and that clarity followed me into every part of my day. Every message, every memory, every small interaction suddenly felt heavier, like I was finally seeing the weight of what I had been carrying for so long. This was no longer just wedding drama, it was a full picture of family betrayal, and I could not ignore it anymore. I tried to continue with my routine, to act normal, but there was a quiet tension inside me that refused to go away. It was not anger yet, it was something deeper, something building, like a pressure that had been held down for too long, and now it was starting to rise. I picked up my phone again, not to scroll, not to distract myself, but to look, really look. I went through old messages, old photos, old conversations, searching for something I could not even fully explain, maybe a moment where things changed, maybe a sign I had missed, and slowly, I started to see it, not one big moment, but many small ones, times I had been there for them without hesitation, times I had shown up, supported, given my energy, my time, my care, and then I compared it to what I received back, and the difference was clear. I had been present in their lives, but they had slowly made me absent in theirs, and that realization did something to me, it shifted something inside me from confusion to understanding, and from understanding to something stronger, something sharper. I was no longer asking why they cut me off. I was starting to ask why I allowed it for so long. That question hit harder than anything else, because it placed the power back in my hands, and with that power came responsibility. Responsibility to stop ignoring what was right in front of me. Responsibility to stop accepting less than I deserved. Responsibility to make a change, and that was when the breaking point arrived, not as a loud explosion, but as a quiet decision. I remember standing in my living room, phone in hand, staring at another message from a family group chat. People talking about outfits for the wedding, laughing, sharing excitement, like I was invisible, like I did not exist, and something inside me finally snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I did not belong in spaces where I had to question my value. I did not belong around people who could celebrate something so big while completely cutting me off without a second thought, and more importantly, I did not need to stay connected to people who had already disconnected from me. That was the moment everything changed. I opened the chat, looked at the names, the messages, the energy, and instead of feeling hurt, I felt something new, distance, not forced, not dramatic, just real. I exited the group, no announcement, no explanation, just a quiet step away, and as simple as that action was, it carried a powerful meaning. It was the first time I chose myself without hesitation, the first time I responded to rejection not with chasing, not with pleading, but with withdrawal, and that felt different, that felt strong. I sat down after that, letting the silence return, but this time it did not feel heavy, it felt clear, like space had been created for something new. I started thinking about everything I had been holding on to, not just people, but expectations, memories, roles I had been playing in other people's lives, and I began to understand something important. Sometimes we stay in places that hurt us, because we are attached to who we used to be in those spaces, but growth requires letting go, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it feels unfamiliar, and in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would no longer stay where I was not valued. I would no longer explain my worth to people who had already decided to ignore it, and I would no longer carry relationships that felt one-sided. That promise did not need witnesses, it did not need approval, it was enough that I made it, because it marked the shift from being cut off to choosing to cut off everything that did not respect me. And as I sat there, I realized something else. This was not the end of the story, this was the turning point. The place where everything begins to move in a different direction, because once you reach your breaking point, you cannot return to who you were before. You either stay stuck in the pain, or you rise into something stronger, and I had already made my choice. I was done being the person who waited to be included. I was becoming the person who decides what deserves access to her life, and that was a kind of power no one could take from me, not even those who thought cutting me off would leave me with nothing. Because what they did not understand was this: their rejection did not weaken me, it revealed me, and what they were about to see next. They never expected the ultimate cutoff. By the time I reached that quiet decision in my living room, something inside me had already changed. I was no longer reacting from pain. I was moving with purpose, and that difference mattered, because this was no longer just about wedding drama or family betrayal. This was about reclaiming control over my life. I woke up the next morning with a calm I had not felt in a long time, not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped waiting for others to fix it. and that clarity gave me direction. I picked up my phone, not to scroll, not to check what they were doing, but to start making decisions, real ones, the kind that shift your life. The first thing I did was go through my contacts, slowly, intentionally, looking at names not just as people, but as experiences, as energy, as truth, and I asked myself a simple question for each one. Does this person truly value me, or have I just been holding on out of habit? And one by one, the answers became clear. Some names stayed, but many did not, and with each number I removed, each thread I deleted, it felt like I was taking back pieces of myself I had given away too freely. This was not anger. This was alignment. I was no longer available to people who were comfortable cutting me off while still expecting access to my life, and that realization made every decision easier. I moved next to my finances, something I had never thought of as emotional before, but now I saw it differently. I had been supporting more than I realized, contributing to events, helping out without hesitation, always showing up when needed, and suddenly I asked myself, why am I investing in spaces where I am not respected? And that question changed everything. I reviewed my commitments, my contributions, and I started withdrawing, quietly but firmly, no announcements, no explanations, just action, because I understood something important. You do not need to argue your boundaries, you enforce them, and as I made those changes, I felt a growing sense of strength. A kind of quiet power that comes from choosing yourself without guilt. The same people who had no problem excluding me from something as important as a wedding would now have to face the reality of my absence in other areas of their lives. And that was not revenge. That was balance. I was simply matching their energy. I was simply honoring the truth they had already shown me. The day of the wedding came sooner than I expected, and I knew it without checking. The messages, the silence, the absence of any attempt to reach out told me everything. This was happening, and I was not part of it. I stood in my room that morning, looking at myself in the mirror, not with sadness, but with clarity. This could have been a day of pain, the day of feeling rejected, a day of questioning my worth, but instead, it became something else. A symbol of change, a reminder that I had chosen not to stay where I was not valued, and that choice mattered more than any invitation ever could. I did not sit at home wondering what they were doing. I did not scroll through pictures or updates. I did not allow myself to be pulled back into a space that had already pushed me out. Instead, I stepped outside, into my own life, into my own space, into a version of myself that was no longer waiting to be included, and that moment, as simple as it looked, was powerful, because it marked the completion of something important. They cut me off, and I cut off everything that did not respect me. Not out of anger, but out of growth, out of self-respect, out of a clear understanding that my value does not decrease, because someone else fails to see it. And as the day passed, I felt lighter, freer, like a weight I had been carrying without noticing had finally been lifted. I realized that sometimes what feels like rejection is actually redirection. Sometimes being excluded is the very thing that pushes you toward a better version of your life. And in that moment, I knew I had not lost anything real. I had only let go of what was no longer aligned with me, and that realization was more powerful than any apology could ever be, because it gave me something no one else could control, peace. And as I stood there, looking ahead instead of looking back, I understood something they did not. Cutting me off did not break me, it revealed my strength, and now that I had fully stepped into that strength, there was no going back, because the person I had become would never again accept being treated like an option, and what came next, what unfolded after this ultimate cutoff, would show them exactly what they lost when they chose to let me go. The aftermath, they didn't expect the days after the wedding passed quietly. But it was not the same kind of silence that started this story. This silence felt different, it felt clean, like a reset, like stepping into a space where the noise of family betrayal and wedding drama no longer controlled my emotions. I woke up each morning without the weight I used to carry, without the need to check my phone, without wondering who had included me or cut me off. And that freedom was something I had never truly experienced before. It made me realize how much of myself I had been giving away just to feel accepted, and how exhausting that had been. But now things were changing, not just around me, but inside me. and that shift was powerful. At first nothing seemed to happen on the outside, no messages, no calls, just distance, the same distance they had created when they decided to cut me off. But this time I was not waiting for it to end. I was building something new within it. I focused on myself, my work, my peace, my growth, and slowly, that energy began to reflect in everything I did. I walked differently. I spoke differently. I carried myself with a quiet confidence that did not need validation, and people started to notice, not immediately, but enough. Then one evening, my phone lit up, a message, a name I had not seen in days, one of the same people who had been part of the silence, part of the decision to exclude me. I looked at it for a moment, not with anxiety, but with calm curiosity. The message was simple, asking how I had been, like nothing had happened, like there had been no rejection, no exclusion, no moment where I was deliberately left out. And that right there showed me everything. Sometimes people do not realize the impact of what they do until they feel your absence, until the support they took for granted is no longer there, until the person they could always reach is no longer available, and now they were starting to feel it, not because I said anything, but because I stepped back, because I chose to cut off everything that did not respect me. More messages followed over the next few days, small attempts, casual conversations, indirect apologies hidden behind normal words, and each one confirmed the same truth. My absence had created a space they could not ignore, but here is what they did not expect. I was no longer the same person they had cut off. I was not waiting to be pulled back in. I was not eager to fix things. I was not interested in returning to a place where I had to question my value. Instead, I responded differently, with boundaries, with clarity, with respect for myself. I did not react emotionally. I did not explain myself. I simply chose what I allowed and what I did not. And that changed the entire dynamic, because when you stop accepting less, people are forced to either rise to your level or lose access to you completely, and not everyone is willing to do that. Some people drift away when they realize they can no longer benefit from you the way they used to, and that is okay, because not everyone is meant to stay in your life forever, especially not those who only valued you when it was convenient. As time passed, the truth became even clearer. The same people who once made me feel invisible were now trying to be seen by me. The same people who cut me off were now feeling what it meant to lose access, and that shift was not something I needed to celebrate, it was something I needed to understand, because it reminded me of how important it is to choose yourself, to protect your peace, to recognize your worth before someone else has the chance to question it. This was no longer about revenge. It was about growth. It was about stepping into a version of myself that no longer depended on external validation, a version that understood that being excluded from the wrong place is actually a blessing, and as I stood in that understanding, I felt something stronger than anything I had felt before, not anger, not sadness, but confidence. A quiet, steady confidence that comes from knowing you are no longer available for anything that disrespects you. And that is the real ending they did not expect. They thought cutting me off would leave me broken, but instead, it made me whole. They thought excluding me would make me feel small, but instead, it showed me how much space I needed to grow. And now, as I look back at everything that happened, I do not see loss. I see clarity. I see strength. I see a turning point that changed my life for the better, because sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that reveal your true power. And if there is one thing this story proves, it is this. When people show you that they can cut you off without hesitation, you have every right to cut off everything that no longer respects your value, and in doing so, you do not lose, you win in a way they will never fully understand, because the greatest victory is not proving something to others. It is becoming someone you are proud of, someone who no longer settles, someone who knows their worth and protects it without apology, and that is exactly who I became when I chose to walk away and never look back.